Victoria Hale grabbed the maintenance worker by the front of his uniform and slammed him against the wall of the executive corridor. The coffee cup in Marco's hand hit the floor. Nobody moved. "Who paid you to bring this here?" She said, her voice low and shaking, in a way it had never shaken in 3 years of running a billion-dollar company. "Who sent you?" The man didn't grab her wrists, didn't shout, didn't even look afraid. He just looked at the old photograph still clutched in her other hand, the one she'd pulled from his wallet 60 seconds ago, and said quietly, "Nobody sent me. Your mother left that for you. She just needed the right person to carry it long enough for you to find it." Victoria let go of him. Her hand was shaking. In 20 years of boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and funeral eulogies delivered without a single tear, Victoria Hale had never shaken in front of anyone. But she was shaking now. Because on the back of that photograph in her dead mother's handwriting were 9 words she could not unfind. "My first daughter deserved to be remembered." First daughter. Which meant Victoria wasn't the only one. Which meant everything the company, the inheritance, the family name she'd built her entire identity on was sitting on top of a secret someone had buried before she was old enough to ask questions. And the man she'd just slammed against the wall of her own building. He was the only person alive who knew the whole truth. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell. What comes next will change everything you think you know about this family. The morning. Victoria Hale found out her entire life was a lie. Started the same way every other morning did, with her already running late and already angry about it. Her assistant Marco was waiting at the elevator bank when she stepped off the executive car at 7:42 a.m., tablet in hand, mouth already moving. Board pre-meeting at 9, the Hargrove contract review at 11, and legal wants 30 minutes before lunch on the Westfield acquisition, he said, falling into step beside her. Also, facilities flagged a maintenance issue on the 42nd floor. They're sending someone up this morning to work on the climate control system before the investors arrive. Victoria didn't break stride. "Tell them to be done before 8:30. I don't want contractors on the executive floor while we're setting up for Hargrove." "They said the technician is already on his way." "Then tell him to move faster." She pushed through the glass doors of her private office, set her bag down, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows for exactly 4 seconds. The only 4 seconds of quiet she allowed herself each morning. 42 floors. The city was already grinding itself awake. Taxis, delivery trucks, 1,000 people with 1,000 different problems, none of them as complicated, she told herself, as hers. She turned away from the window. There was work to do. Victoria Hale was 34 years old, and she had been CEO of Hale Consolidated for 3 years. Before that, she'd been CFO for 2. Before that, VP of Strategy. She had never worked anywhere else. She had never wanted to. Her father, Edward Hale, had built the company from a regional construction firm into a national infrastructure giant before his heart gave out at 61. Her mother, Margaret Hale, had kept it together through the estate transition and then handed it to Victoria with one condition. "Don't let them tell you that you're too young, too emotional, or too anything. You know this company better than anyone. Act like it." Her mother had died 14 months after that conversation. Ovarian cancer, fast and unforgiving. Victoria had been at her bedside for the last 3 weeks, holding her hand through the fog of medication and quiet hours, and her mother had talked about the company, about old memories, about people Victoria didn't always recognize. At the time, Victoria had assumed it was the medication. She wasn't assuming that anymore. But she didn't know that yet on this particular Tuesday morning. On this particular Tuesday morning, she was thinking about the Hargrove contract and the 3 board members she needed to get aligned before 9 o'clock. She picked up her phone and started dialing. Daniel Whitaker had been awake since 4:50 a.m. That wasn't unusual. The Navy had drilled his sleep schedule into something close to military-grade permanence, and 8 years out of uniform hadn't changed it. He woke at 4:50, made coffee, packed his daughter's lunch, peanut butter and strawberry jam, cut diagonal, never straight across, because Lily had told him once that diagonal tasted better, and he had never questioned it since. And then he drove her to his neighbor Mrs. Paulson's house, before heading to whatever job the dispatch had lined him up for. Today it was Hale Tower, 42nd floor, Climate control system pulling too much load on the east wing circuit. Daniel had been doing HVAC and electrical maintenance work for 3 years. Before that, he'd spent 11 years as a Navy intelligence systems technician. The kind of work that required precision patience and a very specific ability to stay calm when everything around you was going sideways. He'd been good at it, genuinely good. His commanding officer had tried twice to get him to re-enlist. But Claire had gotten sick in his last year of service, and after she died, there was no version of his life that involved being deployed somewhere while Lily was growing up without her mother. He'd taken his discharge, moved back to the city, and started working his hands instead of his clearances. He didn't miss the rank. He missed Claire every single day. But Lily was 8 years old now and could make him laugh harder than anyone on the planet, and that counted for something. He badged in at the service entrance at 7:15, signed his paperwork at the security desk, and took the freight elevator up to 42. The executive floor was a different world. Daniel had worked in a lot of buildings, hospitals, government offices, tech campuses, and he'd learned to read a building by the way it felt. Some places were built for work. Some were built to intimidate. Some were built for both. Hale Tower was built to make you feel like you didn't belong there unless someone had personally granted you permission to breathe the air. The carpet was gray and thick enough to absorb sound. The walls were pale white with architectural lighting that made everything look like it cost more than it did. There were no personal touches anywhere, no plants, no photographs on walls, no mismatched chairs. Everything matched everything else. It was the kind of design that said, "We have controlled every variable." Daniel rolled his equipment cart off the freight elevator and checked the work order. East Wing Mechanical Closet B. He oriented himself, found the corridor, and got to work. He didn't need anyone to help him. He never did. By 8 o'clock, Daniel had isolated the issue, a faulty relay in the secondary load distribution panel, and was about halfway through the repair. It was clean, methodical work, the kind he preferred. No surprises, no rushing. Just the job in front of him and the satisfaction of doing it right. He was reaching for a different gauge in his toolbox when he heard the freight elevator open again, and footsteps, sharp, fast, purposeful, moving down the corridor toward the executive suites. He didn't look up. A minute later, those same footsteps came back slower this time, passing the mechanical closet where he was working. Then they stopped. "Is the repair almost done?" He looked up. The woman standing in the corridor was dressed for war. Dark blazer, silk blouse. Everything fitted and pressed and deliberate. She was younger than he'd expected for someone who moved like that. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, taking inventory of him, the way people sometimes do when they've decided the answer before they've heard the question. Daniel set down his gauge. "Should be done by 8:25, he said. "I asked for 8:30. "Then you're getting it 5 minutes early." Something flickered across her face, not quite irritation, closer to surprise that he hadn't apologized. "Good," she said, and walked away. He found out later from Marco, the assistant, who came to check on him at 8:15 with a bottle of water and an apologetic expression, that the woman was Victoria Hale herself, the CEO. "She's not usually up here this early," Marco said in the tone of someone explaining a natural disaster. "The Hargrove people are coming in at 9, and she's in pressure cooker mode." "She's fine," Daniel said. Marco looked at him like he'd said something strange. "Most contractors don't say that." She was direct. "I can work with direct." He finished the repair at 8:23, 2 minutes ahead of his own revised estimate. He documented everything on the work order, signed it, and began packing his tools back into the cart. It was when he lifted the toolbox to reposition it that it happened. The latch on the side pocket, the one he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months, gave way. The pocket swung open, and his wallet, which he'd wedged in there that morning instead of his jacket because his jacket was in the truck, slid out and landed on the polished corridor floor with a flat, quiet slap. He didn't notice. He was focused on the latch, trying to secure it with a zip tie from his cart, and by the time he'd gotten the toolbox locked and turned back around, the wallet was gone. Victoria was walking back toward her office with a coffee she'd grabbed from the executive kitchen when she saw it. A wallet. Old brown leather, worn smooth at the corners, lying on the floor near the mechanical closet where the maintenance worker had been. She picked it up automatically. The intention was simple: find the man, return it, move on with her morning. She turned it over in her hand. The leather was soft in the way that only comes from years of daily use. There was a small anchor symbol embossed on the lower right corner, faded but still legible. She looked down the corridor. The maintenance cart was still there, but the man was around the corner near the freight elevator. She could hear the quiet sound of wheels on tile. She flipped the wallet open to check for an ID card so she could hand it off to security with a name attached. What she found, instead, stopped her mid-step. The ID was there. Daniel Whitaker, the name on this contractor's work order. She clocked that, filed it. But her eyes moved past it to the clear plastic sleeve behind the ID window, where most people kept a second card or a transit pass. Instead, there was a photograph. A man younger in a Navy uniform, grinning with the slightly embarrassed ease of someone who didn't love having his picture taken, and a little girl on his shoulders, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Both of them squinting into what looked like late afternoon sun. Sweet picture. She started to close the wallet. But behind that photograph, tucked into the same sleeve, was another one. Older. The paper was thicker, the image slightly faded at the edges, the way photographs from a certain era always faded. 2 women standing together in what looked like a garden, a brick wall, some climbing roses, afternoon light filtering through leaves. One of the women was younger, 30, maybe 32. Dark hair. Laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. The other woman was looking directly at the lens. One hand lifted, as if she'd just turned around and been surprised by the shutter. And she was smiling, not a posed smile, a real one, the kind that takes over a face before you can manage it. Victoria knew that smile. She had spent 34 years watching it appear at Christmas mornings, at quiet dinners, at hospital bedsides. Her mother's smile. Her mother, Margaret Hale, who had been dead for over 2 years, was standing in a garden somewhere with a woman Victoria had never seen in her life. Victoria's hands were not shaking. She was not the kind of person whose hands shook, but they wanted to. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting she had seen on birthday cards and grocery lists and 1,000 ordinary pieces of paper throughout her entire childhood. Her mother's handwriting. Deliberate and slightly slanted to the right, were 9 words. My first daughter deserved to be remembered. The freight elevator chimed softly down the hall. Victoria looked up. Wait. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. More command than request. The word carried down the corridor with the kind of authority that had stopped rooms full of executives mid-sentence. Daniel Whitaker stopped. He came back around the corner slowly, the way a man comes back when he's not sure what he's being stopped for, but isn't running from anything either. His expression was neutral, measured, patient in a way that somehow made her feel like she was the one who needed to explain herself. This is your wallet, she said. Yes. I need you to tell me about the photograph. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt, not surprise exactly. More like the careful stillness of a man who has been waiting for something to happen and is recalibrating now that it has. Which one? He said. It wasn't a question. The older one, the 2 women. He looked at her for a long moment. How much time do you have? He asked. Not enough, she said honestly. I have investors here in 45 minutes. Then this is going to be a difficult morning. Mr. Whitaker. She kept her voice controlled. I have seen that smile in that photograph every day of my life. That is my mother. And I need to know who she is standing with and how a photograph like that ended up in your wallet. Daniel Whitaker looked at her the way she imagined he might look at a complicated circuit panel, not dismissively, but carefully assessing what was live and what needed to be handled first. Her name was Claire, he said quietly. Claire Whitaker. She was my wife. And how did my mother know your wife? He was quiet for a beat. Then, because your mother was her mother too. The hallway was so silent that Victoria could hear the ventilation system he'd just repaired humming faintly behind the wall. That's not possible, she said. I know that's what you're going to believe first, Daniel said. I understand that, but I need you to know that I didn't come here for this. I'm not here because of your family's name, or your company, or anything your family has. I came here to fix a climate control relay. That's it. Whatever's happening right now. He nodded toward the wallet in her hand. That happened because you picked it up, not because I put it in front of you. My mother had one daughter, Victoria said. Her voice was steady. She needed it to be steady. Me. That's what they told you, he said. And he said it gently, not as an attack, just as a fact that had been sitting somewhere for a long time, waiting to be said out loud. Victoria stared at him. And then, for the first time since she'd found the photograph, something cracked open in the armor of her composure. Not enough for anyone else to see, but enough for her to feel it, a thin, cold fault line running right down the center of everything she thought she knew. I have to make a call, she said abruptly. I know, Daniel said. Don't leave the building. He nodded once. I'll be at the service desk. She turned and walked back toward her office, the old photograph in her hand, and 9 words in her mother's handwriting, turning themselves over and over in her mind. My first daughter deserved to be remembered. Not I had another daughter. Not this is Claire. My first daughter. First. Which meant Victoria was not the first. Which meant Victoria was the second. Which meant the entire story of who she was and where she came from. The story she had built her entire identity on might be a story that someone else had written for her, and she was already late for her 9 o'clock meeting. Marco was standing outside her office with the quiet expression of someone who had learned to read weather by watching her face. The Hargrove team landed. Car service confirms they're 12 minutes out. Push the meeting, Victoria said. Marco blinked. To win. I don't know yet. Push it. Victoria, the contract window on the Hargrove deal closes at the end of the month. If we push today's meeting, Marco. She stopped and turned to face him, and something in her voice or her eyes made him stop talking immediately. Push the meeting. Tell them I have a legal emergency. Use whatever language gets it done. And I need you to get me everything we have on the maintenance contractor we had up here this morning. Daniel Whitaker. Whitker. Whitaker, he said, already typing. Whatever's in the system. Contractor file, background check, employment history, everything. I can have it in 20 minutes. Make it 15. She closed her office door. She sat down at her desk, set the wallet in front of her, and pulled out the photograph again. Her mother, smiling. Standing in a garden Victoria didn't recognize, with a woman she'd never met, who had apparently been, if she was going to allow herself to even form this thought, her half-sister. Claire Whitaker, Daniel's wife. Victoria's hands were on the desk flat, and still, the way she always kept them when she was managing something that wanted to break out of a controlled space. She had spent her entire professional life making decisions based on evidence, not assumptions, not emotion, evidence. So build a case, she told herself. Start from what you know and work outward. What she knew, the photograph was real. She knew her mother's face as well as she knew her own. She knew her mother's handwriting as well as she knew her own signature. What she didn't know, everything else. What she was feeling that was not relevant right now. She picked up her phone and called the one person she called when she needed perspective that wasn't filtered through corporate interest. It rang twice. Victoria. Her Uncle Richard's voice was warm, controlled, the same voice he'd used on the phone her entire life. I thought you had the Hargrove meeting this morning. I pushed it, she said. Richard, I need to ask you something. Of course. Did my mother ever have a child before me? There was a pause. Not the brief pause of someone caught off guard by an unexpected question. Not the longer pause of someone searching their memory for something they half remembered. This was a specific kind of pause, the pause of someone deciding very quickly what to do next. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. What on earth made you ask that? He said, and his voice was perfectly warm, perfectly steady, and perfectly precisely wrong. Victoria had spent 20 years watching Richard Hale operate in boardrooms. She knew exactly what his voice sounded like when he was managing information rather than sharing it. She knew because she had learned it from watching him do it to other people. I found something, she said carefully. A photograph of Mom. I'm trying to understand it. Where did you find it? That's what I'm working on, she said. I'll call you later. She hung up before he could ask anything else. Then she sat very still at her desk for a moment, looking at the photograph, and added one more thing to her list of what she knew. Her Uncle Richard already understood the question she'd just asked. He'd understood it immediately, which meant the secret in her mother's handwriting was not a secret that Richard Hale was learning about for the first time. Marco's file on Daniel Whitaker arrived in 17 minutes, not 15. Marco sent a quiet apology text along with it, and Victoria read it the way she read every important document: fast on the first pass, slow on the second, making notes on the third. The first pass told her the basic shape: 36 years old, honorable discharge from the U.S. Navy, after 11 years of service, current licensed contractor, clean record, 1 dependent. The second pass gave her texture. His Navy specialty had been signals and intelligence systems classified work, the kind that required security clearances most people would never hear about. His performance evaluations, which somehow Marco had gotten access to through a contact at the DoD records office, used words like precise, methodical, exceptional judgment under pressure. His commanding officer had recommended him for promotion twice. He'd declined both times. In the margin of his second performance review, someone had written by hand, "Whitaker could run this department. Chooses not to. Typical." She didn't find a single thing that looked like a scam. Not a debt. Not a criminal charge. Not an attempt to contact Hale Consolidated at any point for any reason ever. He had worked for the same maintenance contracting firm for 3 years. He had never billed more hours than he worked. He had a spotless record with every property manager on his client list. The third pass, the slow one, she spent on the personal details. His wife, Claire Whitaker, née Sullivan, had died 4 years ago. Cause of death listed as complications from an autoimmune condition. She had been 31 years old. They had one daughter, Lily Ann Whitaker, now 8 years old. Victoria stared at Claire's name for a long moment. Sullivan. Not Hale. Not any variation of her family's name. Which meant that if what Daniel had told her was true, and her gut, the instrument she'd been training for 34 years, was telling her that it was then her mother had given Claire up before the Hale name meant anything. Before the money. Before the company. Before Victoria. She set the file down. She thought about her mother's last weeks. The conversations that hadn't fully made sense at the time. The names she'd mentioned, people Victoria didn't know, places she'd visited that weren't in any family album. She thought about one conversation in particular. 3 days before the end, when her mother had grabbed her hand with more strength than she'd seemed to have in days, and said very clearly, "I tried to fix it, Victoria. I want you to know that. I tried to fix it before it was too late." Victoria had squeezed her hand and said, "It's okay, Mom. You don't have to worry." She had thought it was the medication. She had been wrong. She went down to the service desk at 9:40. Daniel was sitting in one of the chairs along the wall, his work order folder on his knee, his toolbox at his feet. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't pacing. He was sitting the way she imagined he sat on long watches, attentive, quiet, waiting for whatever came next without burning energy on anticipation. When he saw her coming, he stood. "I read your file," she said, and then immediately regretted how that sounded. "I'm sorry. That came out like an interrogation." "It's fine," he said. "I would have done the same thing." She studied him. "You don't seem surprised that I checked." "You're a CEO," he said simply. "You found a photograph in a stranger's wallet that upended your understanding of your family history. If you hadn't checked, I'd be worried about your judgment." "Do you know how strange it is," she said, "for someone to respond to me like that?" "Like what?" "Like a rational person." Something that might have been almost a smile crossed his face, but didn't quite land. "I take it most people around here don't. Not when they want something from me." "I don't want anything from you," he said. And he said it the same way he'd said everything else, direct and level, and without the particular energy of someone who was trying to convince her of something. Just a fact, stated plainly. "I want to make sure my daughter is protected. I want Claire's name to mean something. That's all I've ever wanted. And I didn't come here today to make any of that happen. I came here to fix your relay." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "Will you come upstairs?" she said. "Not the executive floor. There's a conference room on 38, neutral ground." He picked up his work order folder and his toolbox. Lead the way. They sat across from each other at a conference table that probably cost more than his truck. Daniel set the wallet on the table between them. Victoria set the photograph beside it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Tell me about Claire," Victoria said. He took a breath. The kind of breath you take when you're about to talk about something that lives in the part of your chest where the heaviest things get stored. "She was the smartest person I ever knew," he said. "And I say that having worked with some genuinely brilliant people in my Navy career. She read everything. She remembered everything. She was also funny in this dry, quiet way that would catch you off guard. She'd say something in the middle of a completely ordinary moment, and it would hit you 3 seconds later, and then you couldn't stop laughing." He paused. "Lily has her laugh, which is—" He stopped. Started again. "Which is the best thing in the world, and also sometimes the hardest thing in the world." Victoria waited. "She found out 2 years before she died," Daniel continued. "She'd been doing what a lot of people do, ancestry websites, DNA testing, that kind of thing. She wasn't even looking for anything particular. She just wanted to know where her family came from, because she'd been adopted as a baby, and her adoptive parents had both passed. And then the test came back, and there was a match she wasn't expecting." "My mother," Victoria said. "Your mother's profile was on one of those sites. She'd done the test herself, and she'd set her privacy to open specifically so that a match could find her. Claire said afterward that she knew when she saw the notification that it wasn't an accident, that your mother had been looking for her." Victoria felt something tighten in her throat. She kept her face still. "They connected through the site's messaging system first," Daniel said. "Then they talked on the phone, and then they met. That photograph," he nodded toward it, "was taken the first day they met in person, in the garden of a restaurant somewhere outside the city. Claire said she couldn't stop shaking when she walked up to her. And your mother, she described it the same way. She said she almost couldn't speak." "How long did they know each other?" "About 2 years. From when Claire found her to when Claire died." His voice was even, but Victoria could hear the effort underneath it. "They kept it private. Your mother was cautious. She said there were people who would make things complicated. She didn't name anyone specifically, but Claire understood she meant the family business side of things, the legal side, inheritance." "Richard," Victoria said, and she said it quietly like a word she was trying out to see how it felt. Daniel looked at her carefully. "I never knew his name from Claire's side of it. She just said your mother was afraid of what someone close to her would do if it came out." "My uncle," Victoria said. "Richard Hale, my mother's brother-in-law. He's managed the family's legal and business affairs for 20 years. She paused. "He's also the person I called an hour ago when I found the photograph. And his voice did something when I asked my question that I've only ever heard it do in one context." "Which context?" "When he's protecting himself." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Your mother told Claire that she had written a letter, that she'd made sure certain things would be documented. She was worried that after she died, someone would manage the narrative." Her words. "Manage the narrative." She wanted Claire to have proof, and she wanted Claire's child Lily to be acknowledged. "What happened to the letter?" "We don't know," Daniel said. "Claire died before your mother. When we tried to find it afterward, when I tried, there was nothing. The estate had already been processed. The attorneys said everything was in order. There was no mention of any other heir, any additional document, any acknowledgement of anyone named Claire. Because someone had already removed it. That's what I believe, yes." Victoria leaned back in her chair. She pressed her fingertips together slowly, the way she did when she was assembling something in her mind, the same gesture she'd made in 100 board meetings, putting pieces into place. "You said your wife kept documentation," she said. "She tried," Daniel said. "She was sick by the end. But she was also organized in the way that people who grew up without much security tend to be organized. She kept records of everything. Letters, screenshots of messages, notes from phone calls. She had a file." "Where is it?" "Somewhere safe," he said simply. "I've had it for 4 years. I wasn't sure what to do with it. I didn't know if it was my place to do anything at all. It was Claire's story, and Claire's connection, And I didn't want to show up at a corporation and demand recognition for a dead woman on behalf of an 8-year-old. That felt wrong to me. So what changed? He was quiet for a moment. Lily asked me last month who her grandmother was, he said. Claire sighed. She's old enough now to understand that there are pieces missing. And I looked at her, and I thought about Claire spending 2 years finally having a mother, finally having a history, and then losing that when she died. And I thought about Lily not even getting to know that story existed. He paused. I couldn't let her grow up thinking she just had no family. That wasn't the truth. And someone took the truth from her before she was old enough to fight for it herself. The conference room was very quiet. I still wasn't planning to come to you, he said. I didn't know how. I was going to go back to the lawyer Claire's mother that your mother had mentioned. See if there was a way to do this that didn't blow everything up. He looked at the wallet, then at Victoria. And then I got a work order for the 42nd floor of Hale Tower, and a latch broke on my toolbox, and here we are. Here we are, Victoria thought. She picked up the photograph. Her mother and Claire laughing in a garden caught by a camera in the middle of something real. My first daughter deserved to be remembered. She looked at the woman across from her, across the table, across everything in this photograph. Dark hair. Mid-30s when the picture was taken. Laughing at something just out of frame. Victoria had her mother's bone structure. Certain people had told her that her whole life, the cheekbones, the line of the jaw. The woman in the photograph had it too. She hadn't seen it the first time she'd looked in the shock of recognizing her mother's face. She saw it now. The file Claire kept, she said, and her voice came out steady, which she appreciated. I'd like to see it. Daniel looked at her. Why? Because if what you're describing is true, then there is someone in my family who has been actively hiding it. And they're not going to stop hiding it just because I know. I need proof. And if I show you the proof, what do you do with it? The right thing, she said. Whatever that costs. He was quiet for a moment. The building hummed faintly around them. My daughter is 8 years old, he said. I need you to understand what that means for how I'm approaching this. If I bring this evidence forward, and someone comes after it, comes after us. She's 8 years old. She doesn't have a mother. She has me, and she has Mrs. Paulson next door, and she has a school bus driver named Gerald, who calls her Lilybug. I cannot let my desire for justice put her in a vulnerable position. I understand, Victoria said. I need you to not just understand it abstractly, he said. I need you to make me a decision as a person, not as a CEO. Because CEOs make decisions that make sense for the company. I need a decision that makes sense for an 8-year-old girl who deserves to know her grandmother's name. Victoria set the photograph down. She had run a billion-dollar company for 3 years. She had made decisions that affected thousands of employees, hundreds of contracts, years of financial futures. She had never had someone ask her to make a decision as a person rather than as a CEO. She wasn't entirely sure what that felt like, but she thought about her mother alone in a hospital bed with a secret that was eating her from the inside. She thought about a woman named Claire, who had spent the last 2 years of her short life finally having a mother, and then lost that too. She thought about a little girl named Lily, who put strawberry jam on diagonal-cut sandwiches and didn't know she had a grandmother who had loved her enough to put herself on a DNA database just so she could be found. Her name was Margaret Hale, Victoria said quietly. And she would have wanted to know her granddaughter. Daniel Whitaker looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his work order folder past the maintenance paperwork and pulled out a sealed envelope. Thick, heavy. The kind of envelope that holds more than just paper. He set it on the table between them. Claire gave me this the week before she died, he said. She said, if it ever matters, give this to someone who needs it more than you're afraid of it. Victoria looked at the envelope. She looked at the man across the table who had come in on a work order this morning to fix a relay, and who was somehow improbably the person holding the key to the most important truth about her family. She reached across the table, and she picked it up. The envelope held 4 things: a handwritten letter in her mother's voice, a trust document with a notary seal, a recording. Victoria couldn't play yet, and a photograph she hadn't seen before. She didn't know it yet, But what was inside that envelope was going to force her to choose between the company, the family name, the uncle who had raised her through every loss, and the truth her mother had spent years trying to set free. She didn't know it yet, but Daniel Whitaker did, and he was watching her face very carefully. Marco was still standing in the corridor holding a broken coffee cup when Victoria walked past him and said without stopping, "Clean that up and cancel everything I have before noon." "Everything," Marco said. "Everything." She didn't look back. Daniel Whitaker straightened his uniform collar, picked up his toolbox, and followed her to the elevator like a man who had learned a long time ago that the best response to chaos was to stay calm and keep moving. His shoulder blades were still pressed with the memory of the wall. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shaken. He had been in situations where people grabbed him out of fear, and he had learned to read the difference between aggression and desperation. Victoria Hale had been desperate. That was different. Desperate people were usually telling the truth about something they just hadn't figured out which truth yet. The elevator opened on 38, and she walked through it the same way she walked through every room, like she'd already decided how the space was going to be used before she entered it. She pulled a chair out at the head of the conference table and sat down and pressed both palms flat on the surface and breathed. Daniel set his toolbox down near the door and stood. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine standing." "I'm not asking because of your comfort," she said. "I'm asking because I need to look at you when I talk to you, and looking up at people puts me at a disadvantage, and right now I have enough of those." He sat down. She looked at him for a moment, really looked the kind of look she gave balance sheets when she was searching for the number that didn't add up. "My uncle's voice did something when I asked him about my mother having another child," she said. "I've known Richard Hale for 34 years. I know every register of that man's voice. I know what he sounds like when he's genuinely surprised, and I know what he sounds like when he's buying himself 2 seconds to construct a response. This morning he bought himself 2 seconds. How long ago did you call him? An hour and 15 minutes. Has he called back?" She glanced at her phone on the table. 3 missed calls, all from Richard. "Yes." "Have you answered?" "No." She looked back at Daniel. "Because I want to know what I'm dealing with before I give him a chance to shape the conversation." She paused. "That's what he does. He shapes conversations. He's very good at it. He shaped the conversation after my father died, and he shaped it after my mother died, and I let him both times because I was grieving, and he was there, and I trusted him." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not grieving right now." Daniel nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Everything," she said. "In order, from the beginning. How Claire found out what they built together, what your mother-in-law—" She stopped, corrected herself quietly. "What my mother told her, and what happened after Claire died. Everything." So Daniel told her. He talked the way he did everything methodically, without ornamentation, in the order that things had actually happened. He had learned in his Navy career that the most useful thing a person could do in a high-stakes situation was resist the urge to editorialize and just give the facts in sequence, because facts in sequence told their own story better than any framing ever could. Claire had done the DNA test on a Tuesday night in November 3.5 years before she died while Lily was asleep and Daniel was on a late shift. She'd done it on a whim. She told him afterward. She'd seen an ad, thought it might tell her something about where her adoptive family's roots had come from, ordered the kit without thinking too much about it. She'd grown up with good people. The Sullivans had been warm and steady and present, and when they died within 2 years of each other, Claire had felt the loss the way you feel the loss of a house you grew up in, not just the people, but the context. The sense of being known. She hadn't been looking for a biological mother. She hadn't been looking for anything in particular. But 6 weeks after she mailed the kit back, the results came, and at the bottom of the ancestry breakdown was a notification she hadn't expected: close family match detected. The profile on the other end had a first name only. Margaret. No last name. Privacy settings open for matching, but closed for full identification. But there was a message already waiting in Claire's inbox when she logged in to check the match, as if the woman on the other end had set up an alert for exactly this moment and had been waiting possibly for years for it to arrive. The message said, "I've been hoping you would find this. I don't want to overwhelm you. I just want you to know that I have thought about you every single day of your life and that I never stopped looking. If you want to talk, I'm here. If you don't, I understand that too. Either way, I'm glad you exist." Claire had read it 4 times and then called Daniel at work and read it to him over the phone, and he had listened and then said carefully, "How do you feel?" And Claire had said, "Like the floor just turned into something I didn't know floors could be made of." They had talked for 3 weeks before they met in person. Margaret, who Claire did not yet know, was Margaret Hale, who had not yet told her last name, who was being cautious in a way that Claire initially read as reluctance, but later understood was protection. Called her on a Thursday evening, and they talked for 2 hours. Then again, the following week. Then again. They talked about small things first. What Claire did for work. What Lily was like. What Margaret's garden looked like in the fall. They talked around the big thing, the way you circle something hot before you're ready to touch it. Then, one evening, Margaret had said, "I need to tell you some things that are going to be complicated. Not because I want to complicate your life, but because I don't want you to find out from someone else, and I don't want you to think I was hiding from you. I was hiding from a situation, not from you, never from you." And she had told Claire that she was Margaret Hale, that her family's name was on a company that employed several thousand people, that there were legal and financial structures built around that name, that certain people would defend aggressively if they felt threatened, and that there was a man, her late husband's brother, who had managed the family's affairs for 2 decades, who she was afraid would move to protect those structures if he found out that Claire existed. "She wasn't ashamed of me," Daniel told Victoria, and his voice stayed level, but something in it pressed against the levelness from the inside. "I want you to understand that. She was not ashamed of giving Claire up. She was 17 years old alone, and she had nothing. She made the only decision she could make, and she carried it with her for 30 years. She wasn't ashamed. She was afraid of what someone else would do with the information." Victoria was quiet. "She said your uncle had fought to restructure the inheritance documents after your father died," Daniel continued. "That he had pushed through changes that consolidated control in ways that your mother hadn't fully understood until it was done. And that if he found out there was another Hale heir, or someone with a credible claim to recognition as family, he would do whatever it took to make that claim disappear." "She wasn't wrong," Victoria said, and her voice was very flat when she said it. "No," Daniel agreed. "She wasn't." They had met in person on a Sunday afternoon in March at a restaurant outside the city that Margaret had chosen specifically because it wasn't the kind of place anyone from her world would be on a Sunday afternoon. A garden table. Climbing roses on a brick wall. Claire had worn the blue jacket she always wore when she was nervous because she said the color made her feel like herself. Margaret had been waiting at the table when she arrived, and when Claire walked up, Margaret had stood and turned, and the camera. Daniel's camera, because he had dropped Claire off and waited in the car, but she had come back to get him, because she said she couldn't do the moment without at least knowing he was nearby. Nearby had caught Margaret mid-turn, surprised, smiling before she could manage it. That was the photograph. That was the moment in Victoria's hand. "She cried," Daniel said. "Margaret. Claire told me she cried from the moment she stood up from that chair until about 45 minutes into lunch, and then she laughed about crying and said she'd promised herself she wouldn't do that, and Claire said she was glad she did. She said it made it real." Victoria's hands were still flat on the table. She had not moved them in a long time. "They had 2 years," Daniel said. "They met in person 6, maybe 7 times, always outside the city, always quietly. They talked on the phone more than that. Claire said they talked more in those 2 years than she'd talked to anyone in her adult life except for me. She said your mother was—" He paused, searching for the word Claire had used. "She said she was the kind of person who listened like your words mattered to her, like she was storing them." Victoria closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. "My mother listened like that to everyone," she said quietly. "It was the thing people said about her at the funeral that made me cry. I'd heard it my whole life, and it still wasn't something you could prepare to hear past tense." Daniel gave her a moment. "Then, 6 months before Claire died, your mother told her she had put things in writing. A letter, a trust amendment she'd worked with a private attorney not the family firm, someone in another city that Richard wouldn't know to call. She said she'd made sure that Claire's existence was documented, that Lily's connection to the family was documented, and she'd recorded herself explaining it all so that there was a voice attached to the paperwork that no one could argue wasn't hers. Where did she file it? With the private attorney, Daniel said. A woman named Harriet Bloom out of a small firm in Albany. Your mother told Claire that if anything happened to either of them, Harriet Bloom would know what to do. Victoria reached for her phone. I need that name in writing, she said. He pulled out a pen from his work order folder, tore a clean strip from the bottom of the documentation page, and wrote, Harriet Bloom. Albany. Private practice. He slid it across the table. Victoria looked at it. Then she looked up at him. What happened when you went to find her? She's gone, Daniel said. Her firm closed 18 months ago. Her partner told me she retired suddenly and moved out of state, and he didn't have a forwarding address. He said it like a man who'd been told to say exactly that and nothing more. The silence in the room had a specific quality now, the kind that comes after a sentence that explains several other sentences. So someone got to her, Victoria said. Or someone scared her enough that she got to herself, Daniel said. Either way, the documents she was holding, if they existed in paper form with her firm, are gone. But Claire kept copies. Claire kept everything, Daniel said, and for the first time since they'd sat down something in his face changed, softened just slightly around the edges. She was the most organized person I have ever known. Growing up without roots makes you careful about evidence. You learn to keep your own records because you can't count on someone else's story, including you. He touched the edge of the envelope on the table between them, the sealed one he'd placed there earlier, the one Victoria hadn't opened yet. She kept printed copies of every message, screenshots, notes from every phone call with dates and what was said. 2 recordings of conversations with your mother with her permission, always with her permission. And the letter. Your mother sent her an actual letter, handwritten 14 pages about a month before Claire's condition got worse. About who she was, what she'd done, what she hoped for, and what she was afraid of. Victoria looked at the envelope. 14 pages, she said. Your mother wrote the way she talked, Daniel said. Claire said she read it so many times the paper got soft at the folds. Victoria pressed her lips together. She pulled the envelope slightly closer. Then she stopped, because she had learned over years of high-stakes decisions that the moments just before you open something irreversible are worth a breath of consideration. If Richard finds out I have this, she said, what do you think he does? I think he moves fast, Daniel said. He's had 18 months since Claire died to believe the problem went away on its own. He's not going to react well to finding out it didn't. He's already called me 3 times since I talked to him this morning. Then you have less time than you think. Her phone buzzed again on the table. Richard. She turned it face down. I need to know one more thing before I open this, she said. And I need you to answer it straight without managing what you think I can handle. I'll try, Daniel said. Do you believe my mother knew she was dying before she died? Victoria asked. Not medically. I mean, do you think she knew there was a window closing, that she was trying to beat the clock on something? Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the recording Claire had played for him once of a phone call between her and Margaret, about 6 weeks before Claire's health declined sharply. He thought about the specific urgency in Margaret's voice in that recording, controlled but urgent. The way a person's voice gets when they know they're running out of runway. Yes, he said simply. Victoria nodded once, like someone having a suspicion confirmed that they'd already made their peace with. She tried to fix it, she said almost to herself. I'm sorry. She said that to me, 3 days before she died. She grabbed my hand and said, I tried to fix it, Victoria. I want you to know that I tried to fix it before it was too late. I thought it was the medication. I told her it was okay and not to worry. Victoria looked at the envelope. I didn't know she was telling me something specific. She was, Daniel said. I know that now. She picked up the envelope. She broke the seal. The contents were exactly as Daniel had described: a letter in her mother's handwriting, a notarized trust amendment, A USB drive labeled in Claire's handwriting with a single word, Margaret, and a photograph Victoria had never seen. In this one, her mother was sitting on a bench in what looked like a park, and on her lap was a little girl, maybe 4, maybe 5, dark-haired and laughing at something out of frame, completely unposed, completely comfortable, and Margaret had both arms around the girl and her chin resting lightly on top of her head, and her eyes were closed, and the expression on her face was the kind that you only make when you are somewhere you have been trying to get back to for a very long time. The child was Lily. Her mother had met Lily. Victoria set that photograph down and looked at the wall for a moment and did not speak. Daniel did not try to fill the silence. He understood the specific quality of silence that belongs to someone absorbing something that is rearranging the furniture in a room they thought they knew perfectly. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was even. It cost her something to keep it that way, but it was even. "How many people know about this?" she asked. "On your family's side, I believe Richard knows Claire existed or suspected it. Whether he knows about Lily, I'm not sure. On my side, no one. I've told no one. I have a neighbor, Mrs. Paulson, who watches Lily sometimes, and she knows Claire had a complicated biological family situation, but nothing more than that. And the attorney who closed her practice. She knows enough to be scared," Daniel said. "Which means someone made sure she was. That takes resources," Victoria said. "And reach. Richard has both." She set the trust document in front of her and began reading it. Her eyes moved fast and precise, the same speed she read every document, which was faster than most people and more carefully than almost anyone. After 3 minutes, she set it down. "This is real," she said. "This is her signature, her attorney's notary seal, and the language is specific enough that someone with legal knowledge drafted it. This wasn't improvised. Claire said your mother worked with the Albany attorney for almost 2 months on the wording. It names Lily," Victoria said. "By name. Lily Ann Whitaker, biological granddaughter of Margaret Elaine Hale, to be recognized as a legitimate family heir and entitled to consideration in any future estate distributions." She paused. "If this document surfaces through proper channels, it opens questions about the entire estate settlement. Richard restructured everything 6 weeks after my mother died. If this predates that, she checked the notary date, and it does by 9 months, then what he did may have been structured specifically to render this impossible to act on. Can he do that?" "He tried," Victoria said. "Whether it holds up is a different question, one that attorneys are going to fight over for a long time." She looked up. "But I'm not going to an attorney first. Not yet." "What are you going to do first?" "I'm going to find out exactly what Richard did," she said. "And I'm going to find out from inside the company where I have access to everything, and he doesn't know I'm looking yet." She stood up. "I need you to leave the originals of everything in this envelope with me." Daniel's expression shifted slightly. Not quite resistance. Something more careful than that. "I understand what I'm asking," she said immediately. "I understand those documents are the only proof you have. I understand that giving them to me means trusting a person you met 3 hours ago who slammed you against a wall." "I have trusted people in worse situations than this," Daniel said. "I'm sure you have." She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to tell you what I told a Navy admiral 3 years ago when he questioned my judgment on the Meridian acquisition, and I turned out to be right. I don't ask for trust based on feelings. I ask for it based on alignment. Your goal is to protect Lily and honor Claire. My goal is to understand what was done to my family and correct it. Those goals are the same goal. That makes us aligned." Daniel picked up the empty envelope and held it for a moment. He thought about Claire, about her voice on the phone that night when she told him she was leaving this in his hands. If it ever matters, give it to someone who needs it more than you're afraid of it. He thought about Lily at Mrs. Paulson's house right now, probably coloring something complicated and explaining it to Mrs. Paulson with the earnest authority of an 8-year-old expert. He set the envelope down. "Okay," he said. "Thank you," Victoria said. And she said it simply, without the professional gloss she normally put on courtesy. Just 2 plain words. She gathered the documents, the USB drive, the photographs. She paused on the last photograph, Lily on her mother's lap. Both of them caught in a moment they hadn't known was being saved. She held it a second longer than the others. Then she put everything in the inside pocket of her blazer close to her body, the way she carried the things that mattered most. "I need a number for you," she said. He gave her his cell. "I'll be in touch within 48 hours. Don't contact me before then. If something changes on your end, if anyone approaches you, anyone at all for any reason, call me immediately. Not Marco, not security. Me directly." "Understood," he said. She started for the door. "Victoria." She turned. He almost never used first names. It wasn't his habit. But it felt like the right word for what he was about to say. "Your mother was a good person," he said. "I never met her. But Claire talked about her the way people only talk about someone who made them feel like they counted. Like they mattered to the universe in some specific way that hadn't existed before they met." He paused. "I just thought you should hear that from someone outside your family." Victoria stood very still for a moment. "That's the best thing anyone has said to me in a long time," she said quietly. And then she walked out. "Damn!" Richard Hale called for the fourth time at 12:17. This time Victoria answered. "I've been worried," he said, and his voice was warm and measured, and exactly the right temperature for a concerned uncle. "That was an unusual question this morning. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "I've been in back-to-back meetings. What did you need?" "I wanted to understand what you'd found," he said carefully. "You said a photograph. Old family pictures," she said evenly. "I've been going through some of Mom's things. You know how that is. You find something and your mind goes to strange places." A pause. Shorter than the first one, but the same species. "Of course," he said. "Ed, would you like company? I could come by the office tomorrow morning." There it is, Victoria thought. He wants to see what I have. I'd actually love that, she said in the voice she used when she wanted someone to believe they were winning. "Let's say 9 o'clock. I'll have Marco put it in the calendar." "Perfect," Richard said, and the warmth in his voice had just a fraction too much relief in it. "I'll see you then." She hung up. She sat alone in her office with the city 42 floors below her and the documents pressed against her chest in her inside pocket, and thought about the 42 hours between now and 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and what she could find in that time, and what Richard would spend the same hours trying to make sure she didn't find. She thought about a 17-year-old girl alone, and broke and terrified, making the hardest decision of her life, and then spending the next 30 years looking for the daughter she'd placed with strangers. She thought about a woman named Claire, dying at 33 in a hospital room, after 2 years of finally having a mother, leaving behind a little girl and a sealed envelope, and a husband who cut sandwiches on the diagonal because he loved her enough to learn what diagonal meant to her. She thought about what it meant that the person who had carried that secret across her building this morning, who had every reason to walk away from a fight that wasn't his birthright, had instead sat across from her in a conference room and handed her the only proof he had without asking for anything in return. She thought about how she had looked at his uniform that morning and seen a maintenance worker. She pulled out her laptop. She opened the internal drive that housed 20 years of Hale consolidated financial records. She started looking, and in her inside pocket folded close to her chest, her mother's handwriting pressed quietly against her heart. "My first daughter deserved to be remembered." This time Victoria was going to make sure she was. She worked through the night, not because she had planned to. She had told herself at 7 o'clock that she would work until 10 and then go home and sleep, because a person who didn't sleep made mistakes, and she could not afford mistakes right now. Then 10 became 11, and 11 became 1 in the morning, and somewhere around 2 a.m. She stopped noticing the time entirely, because what she was finding in the financial records was the kind of thing that made time irrelevant. Marco had left at 8 with a worried look and a container of soup from the place 2 blocks over that she had not touched. The floor was empty. The city outside her windows had shifted from its daytime roar into its nighttime murmur. And Victoria sat at her desk in the quiet building with 20 years of Hale consolidated financial history open across 4 monitors and pulled threads. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, the specific skill of looking at numbers until the numbers told her what they were hiding. Her father had called it pattern recognition. Her first finance professor had called it intuition trained into discipline. She called it the thing she did when something was wrong, and she needed to know exactly how wrong before she said so out loud. What she found in the first 2 hours was subtle. The kind of subtle that was designed to look like ordinary accounting variance. Small redirections in estate management fees, restructured distributions that shifted percentages by fractions that individually meant nothing but collectively added up to something that made her jaw tighten. Richard's firm had billed the estate for advisory services at rates that were technically within range of market value, but sat consistently at the top of that range every quarter for 6 years. That wasn't fraud. That was aggressive billing. But aggressive billing was not what she was looking for, and she knew how to tell the difference between a man helping himself to first-class fees and a man who was actively concealing something. She kept pulling. At midnight, she found the first real thing. It was buried in the estate settlement records from 14 months after her mother's death. A line item in the legal fees column that referenced a retainer payment to a firm called Aldgate Consulting Group. She almost passed it. The amount was significant, but not extraordinary in the context of a billion-dollar estate settlement. The date was ordinary. The description said simply, Special Advisory Services Document Management. Document Management. She sat with that phrase for a moment. Then she searched Aldgate Consulting Group in every database she had access to, which was a number that would have surprised most people, given that she ran a company with subsidiaries in 11 states. Aldgate Consulting Group did not have a website. It did not have a registered office that she could verify as currently active. It had been incorporated in Delaware as thousands of shell entities were, because Delaware made it easy 18 months before her mother died. And it had received exactly 3 payments from Hale Consolidated Estate Accounts over a period of 8 months, and then it had gone completely quiet. The total paid to Aldgate Consulting Group was $430,000. She pushed back from her desk, stood up, walked to the window, and stood there for a full minute without moving. $430,000 paid to a shell company for document management in the months immediately following her mother's death. In the same window of time, when, according to what Daniel had told her, an attorney named Harriet Bloom in Albany had abruptly closed her practice and relocated with no forwarding address. She was not the kind of person who believed in coincidences when the alternative explanation was this clean. She went back to her desk, and she kept pulling. By 3 in the morning, she had a picture that was incomplete but coherent, the way a photograph is coherent even before the last details develop. Richard had moved quickly after Margaret's death within the first 60 days, while Victoria was still deep in grief and trusting him to manage the technical complexity of the estate. He had restructured 3 separate distribution mechanisms. He had renegotiated the terms of the family trust in ways that required Victoria's signature, which she had given on the advice of the estate attorneys, who were, she now understood, Richard's estate attorneys. He had paid $430,000 to a company that appeared to exist for no other purpose than to receive that payment. And he had done all of it while standing at her elbow at the funeral, putting his hand on her shoulder and saying things like, "Your mother would be proud, and we'll get through this together." She picked up her phone. She did not call Richard. She called the one person she trusted completely and without reservation, which was a very short list that had gotten shorter every year. She'd run the company because power had a way of making you uncertain about other people's motives, in direct proportion to how much of it you accumulated. The phone rang 4 times. Victoria. Ellen Park's voice was thick with interrupted sleep, but became alert within 2 syllables the way it always did, because Ellen Park had been Hale Consolidated's head of internal audit for 7 years, and had the instincts of someone who had been woken in the middle of the night before, with things that mattered. "What time is it?" 3:15, Victoria said. "I need you." At 3:15. "I found something in the estate records. I need a second set of eyes from someone who doesn't report to Richard, hasn't ever reported to Richard, and will tell me if I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing, or if I'm building a case out of grief and a bad night's sleep." A pause on Ellen's end. She heard movement Cover's feet on a floor. "Give me 40 minutes, Ellen said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. If you're right about whatever this is, neither of us is going to feel good about it. I know, Victoria said. If you're wrong, you're buying me breakfast. Deal. Ellen arrived in 38 minutes, which was 2 minutes ahead of schedule. And something Victoria noted without surprise, because Ellen Park was constitutionally incapable of being late to anything that mattered. She sat down, accepted the coffee. Victoria had made, looked at the monitors, and didn't say anything for a long time. She asked 3 questions. Victoria answered all 3. Ellen pulled her reading glasses from her jacket pocket. She always carried them even in the middle of the night, and leaned close to the screen. 14 minutes later, Ellen sat back and took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. The Aldgate payments are wrong, she said flatly. Not aggressive. Wrong. There's no corresponding service that justifies document management billing at that level for an estate of this nature. And the timing, she shook her head. This was paid out during the contestability window of the estate settlement. That's not an accident. Someone was paying to resolve something during the period when it was most vulnerable to challenge. Resolve, Victoria said. You mean suppress. I mean, I don't know enough yet to use that word legally, but structurally, yes. That's what this looks like. I need you to build the full picture, Victoria said. Everything from the day my mother died to 6 months after the estate closed. Every unusual payment, every restructuring, every decision that didn't require my involvement, but should have. I need it documented in a way that a board can read and understand and act on. Ellen looked at her carefully. If I do this, and it goes where I think it's going, you understand that Richard Hale is going to come at you with everything he has. I know. He's been in this family's orbit for 20 years. He has relationships with half the board. He has attorneys that specialize in exactly this kind of fight. I know that too. So why now? Ellen asked. What happened today that made this the day? Victoria thought about how to answer that. She thought about a wallet on a corridor floor, a photograph of a woman she'd never met, 9 words in her mother's handwriting. She thought about a man in a worn uniform who had sat across from her and told her the truth without asking for anything in return, which was a rarer thing than people admitted. Someone carried a secret across my building this morning, she said. Someone my mother trusted to carry it long enough for me to find it. And it turns out she was right to trust him. Ellen studied her. How many people know about this? 3. You, me, and the man who carried it. Keep it that way until I have something solid. How long? Give me 48 hours. I have Richard coming in at 9 tomorrow morning. Ellen's expression did not change, but something behind it sharpened considerably. Then you need to give him nothing. Be warm, be normal. Be a niece who looked through some old photographs and got sentimental. Can you do that? I spent 3 years in a boardroom convincing people I wasn't as young as I looked, Victoria said. I can do that. Good. Ellen picked up her coffee, looked at the monitor, and set to work. Victoria slept for 4 hours on the couch in her office and woke up at 7:45, looking by her own assessment in the bathroom mirror, like someone who had slept for 4 hours on a couch. She did what she could, changed into the spare blazer she kept in her closet for emergencies, and was at her desk with a real coffee before 8:30. Richard arrived at 9 o'clock exactly. He walked in the way. He always walked in, tall, measured, silver-haired, and polished in the manner of a man who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He had been handsome once, and had aged into the kind of distinguished that people in his world mistook for trustworthiness. He hugged Victoria the way he always did, one hand on her shoulder, the practiced warmth of a man for whom affection had long since become a tool he was too comfortable with to notice he was using it. You sounded strange yesterday, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. I was worried all night. I'm fine, she said. I'm sorry for the dramatic question. I found some old pictures of Mom and I went down a rabbit hole. What kind of pictures? Just family things, old ones. You know how it is, you find something in a box and suddenly it's 2 hours later and you're looking at photographs from before you were born. She smiled the smile she used in negotiations when she wanted someone to believe they were in a friendly conversation and not a strategic one. I think I was just missing her. Richard's face settled into something soft and sympathetic. Of course you were. It comes in waves. Even now. He paused. What was the photograph that caught your attention? And there it was. Arrived within 60 seconds, which was almost impressive. "Just one of her in the garden," Victoria said easily. "She looked so young. I kept trying to figure out where it was taken." "Which garden?" "I couldn't tell. Somewhere with a brick wall and roses." She watched his face. "Do you know the place?" Something moved behind his eyes, fast controlled, immediately managed. He shook his head with a slight smile. "Your mother had a lot of gardens she loved. She was always dragging your father somewhere with good climbing roses." He leaned back. "That's all it was. You seemed rattled on the phone." "I wasn't rattled," she said. "I was distracted. The Hargrove rescheduling threw my whole morning." She let him steer the conversation toward the Hargrove deal, which she knew he would because Richard always moved to solid ground when he felt uncertain about terrain. She answered his questions about the contract with exactly enough detail to be convincing and exactly not enough to give him anything he didn't already have. She laughed at one of his jokes. She accepted the coffee Marco brought without looking at her phone. She performed the role of niece and CEO seamlessly for 52 minutes. And when Richard stood to leave, she stood with him and walked him to the elevator and hugged him at the door the way she always had. "We should have dinner soon," he said. "Absolutely," she said. "Next week. I'll have my assistant call Marco." The elevator doors closed. Victoria stood in this corridor for a moment, alone, her arms folded across her chest, and let her face do what it had been refusing to do for 52 minutes. Then she went back to work. Daniel was at a job in Midtown, a residential building with a faulty circuit in the laundry room, when his phone buzzed with a number he'd programmed in the night before, with the label he'd decided on after a moment's consideration, V. Hale Trust. He stepped into the stairwell and answered. "I need you to do something for me," Victoria said. No preamble, which he appreciated. "The recording on the USB drive. I listened to it last night. It's 43 minutes of my mother explaining everything who Claire was, what she'd done legally, what she wanted for Lily. Her voice is clear, and she's lucid, and she identifies herself by name 3 times. It is, legally speaking, a very strong piece of evidence." "Okay," Daniel said. "I need you to tell me whether there's anything on it that you wouldn't want made public eventually, personal things about Claire that should stay private. Anything you'd want protected before this goes in front of attorneys and possibly a board." He thought about it. He had listened to the recording twice, once the night Claire gave him the USB, once in the 2 years since, on a night when he'd needed to hear Margaret Hale's voice describe his wife as someone worth moving mountains for. "There's a part where Margaret talks about Claire's childhood," he said. "The family that raised her. She's careful about it, kind, but it's personal." "Do you want it redacted?" "No," he said after a moment. "Claire would have wanted it heard. She spent 30 years not existing in anyone's official story. She'd want the whole thing on record." "Okay," Victoria said. "Then I need to ask you something harder." "Go ahead." "I found financial evidence that someone paid a significant amount of money to a company that I believe was used to suppress the documents my mother filed with Harriet Bloom. I have enough to make a case, but not enough yet to make it airtight. And I have a board meeting in 8 days." She paused. "If I bring this to the board before I have everything, Richard can challenge the evidence and buy himself time to destroy what's left. If I wait until I have everything, I risk him finding out that I'm looking and doing it anyway. So you need something that forces his hand before he's ready," Daniel said. "Yes. You need him to react. I need him to react in a way that shows the board what he is before he's had time to construct a defense." Daniel leaned against the stairwell wall, thinking. He had spent 11 years in Navy intelligence working exactly this kind of problem, not the violence kind, but the information kind. The kind where the goal was to create a situation where the other side's response revealed more than their silence would. It was a specific discipline. You had to understand what the other person was protecting well enough to threaten exactly that thing and nothing else. And then you had to be patient enough to let them walk into the reaction. "He thinks you bought his performance this morning," Daniel said. "He did. So he's comfortable. He believes he's ahead of you." "Yes." "Then you give him something to react to that doesn't come from you," Daniel said. something that appears to surface independently, so that when he moves to contain it, the movement itself is the evidence. Silence on her end for a beat. What do you mean? I mean, you let him think that I'm the problem, Daniel said. Not you. If he believes you've gone quiet and I've surfaced independently, that the man from the maintenance job has gone looking for attorneys, maybe reached out to someone in the media, he'll react to me. He'll try to contain me. And the way he tries to contain me will tell you everything you need to know about how far he's willing to go. That puts you in his crosshairs. I'm already in his crosshairs. He just doesn't know my name yet. He said it the way he said things in the Navy, when risk was part of the calculation, and the question wasn't whether it was risky, but whether it was the right move. I've dealt with people who protect power by erasing inconveniences. I know how they operate. They're not actually unpredictable, they just seem that way because most people are too scared to look at them directly. I don't want you exposed without protection, Victoria said. What kind of protection do you have in mind? I want to document every interaction, every contact attempt, every communication that comes your direction from anyone connected to Richard or his network. I want a legal record starting now. And I want you to have an attorney, someone I trust, someone outside any connection to my family on standby, before we do anything. I was quiet for a moment. Down the stairwell, he could hear the faint sound of the laundry room machinery he hadn't finished fixing. And Lily, he said. Lily is not part of this, Victoria said immediately. Whatever happens, she is not involved. Her name appears nowhere in any public action, and if there is any point at which I believe she is at risk in any way, we stop. Full stop. No negotiation. He heard it in her voice, the same thing he'd heard the day before, when she'd said her name was Margaret Hale, and she would have wanted to know her granddaughter. Not policy, not strategy. Something underneath policy and strategy that was more basic than either. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. One more thing, he said. What? My daughter gets home from school at 3:15. I cut her sandwich diagonal. I don't miss that. A pause. Then, I'll make sure whatever we do doesn't make you miss it. He went back to fix the laundry room circuit. Ellen called at 4:17, with a voice that told Victoria the answer before she heard the words. It's worse than you thought, Ellen said. Tell me. The Aldgate payments are the tip. I found 2 more entities, both incorporated in the same 6-month window, both dissolved within a year. One received payments described as legal consultation. One received payments described as records processing. She paused to let that land. Records processing. During the estate settlement. On top of the Aldgate payments, we're looking at over $600,000 paid to entities that should not exist for the purposes listed. Victoria was very still. There's more, Ellen said. Go ahead. The trust amendment. The one Richard filed 41 days after your mother died. The one you signed. I had our outside counsel. Look at the language without context. Just the language. She came back within 2 hours. She said the amendment is structured in a way that is specifically and precisely designed to render any pre-existing claims by biological relatives outside the named family line legally inert. Her words, this was written to solve a problem, not to manage an estate. She said whoever drafted it knew exactly what they were protecting against. The thing that Victoria had been managing for 36 hours, the cold factual anger that she had been keeping below the surface, where it couldn't compromise her judgment, moved upward. She pushed it back down. He knew, she said. He knew about Claire. He knew before my mother died. He drafted a legal instrument to make sure that if the truth ever came out, it would be too late to act on it. That is what the evidence suggests, Ellen said carefully. Whether a court would agree is a different question. I'm not going to court first, Victoria said. You're going to the board. I'm going to the board, Victoria confirmed. Ellen was quiet for a moment. Victoria, if you take this to the board before Richard knows what you have, you get one shot. 1. If you don't land it cleanly, he recovers and comes back at you, and you are standing in the middle of your own company with a very complicated family secret, and a man who has 20 years of relationships with every person in that room. I know. So you need to be certain. I'm not certain yet, Victoria said honestly. But I'm going to be. What are you missing? I'm missing a direct line between Richard and Harriet Bloom. I can show he paid money to shell companies. I can show the trust amendment was drafted to solve a specific problem. But I can't yet show that the specific problem he was solving was Claire, not to a board who doesn't know Claire existed. You need to connect the payment to the suppression of the document. Yes. And right now all you have is timing. Timing and a $430,000 payment to a company called Aldgate with no verifiable services rendered, Victoria said. Which is circumstantial. She heard Ellen exhale slowly on the other end. There's one more thing I haven't told you yet, Ellen said. Tell me. The attorney who processed the trust amendment, not the estate attorneys, the one who specifically drafted the amendment language. I ran her name through bar records. She left private practice 14 months ago. She joined a firm in Washington, D.C. Ellen paused. The firm is a subsidiary of a holding company. The holding company has 3 investors. One of them is Richard Hale. The room was completely silent. He hired her into a firm he controls, Victoria said quietly. 2 months after the estate settled. After she'd already done the work. Yes. Victoria set down her phone for a moment, not hanging up, just setting it down, and pressed her hands flat on her desk and breathed through her nose the way she breathed when something was trying to break out of the container she kept for things that were trying to break out. She picked the phone back up. Can you document the corporate structure? She said. The holding company, the subsidiary, the connection to Richard. I can have it by tomorrow morning. Do it. She hung up and sat alone in the quiet office with the city going dark outside her windows and the document trail spreading through her mind like a map of a place she had been walking through her entire life without knowing what it actually was. Her phone buzzed with the text from a number she didn't recognize at first. Then she remembered she'd given it out that morning. The text said, Lily wanted me to tell you that she had a good day. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I think she would have wanted to. It was signed, D. Victoria stared at the message for a moment. Then she typed back, Tell her I'm glad. She put the phone in her pocket. She pulled the photograph from her inside pocket, the one of her mother and Lily on the park bench, both of them unaware of the camera, both of them just exactly where they wanted to be. She looked at it for a long time. Her mother had known something was wrong long before she died. She had known that the documents she'd filed would be in danger. She had known that Richard would move, and she had not put her trust in attorneys or banks or legal mechanisms. She had put her trust in a man with an old wallet and a broken toolbox latch and a daughter who needed her lunch cut diagonal because she had understood something that Victoria was only now beginning to understand too. The most powerful place to hide a truth is not in a vault or a law firm or a sealed document. It is in the hands of someone that powerful people don't think to look at. A maintenance worker. A former Navy technician in a worn uniform. A man who sat quietly in the lobby of a building full of powerful people, waiting to be told what to do next, while carrying in his breast pocket the one thing that could bring the whole structure down. Her mother had chosen him because the people who built walls to keep secrets in never thought to guard the service entrance. Victoria set the photograph down. She opened her laptop. She had 6 days until the board meeting. She got back to work. The call came at 6:40 in the morning, 5 days before the board meeting. Daniel was in the kitchen making Lily's lunch when his phone rang, an unknown number, local area code, someone calling before 7, which in his experience meant either an emergency or someone who didn't care whether they were an inconvenience. He answered with one hand while the other held the bread knife. Mr. Whitaker. The voice was male smooth and had the specific quality of a voice that had been professionally trained to sound unthreatening. My name is Paul Garrett. I'm an attorney representing certain interests connected to the Hale family estate. I was hoping we could find a time to speak. Daniel set down the bread knife slowly. How did you get this number? He said. We have access to contractor records through Hale Towers Facilities Management, Garrett said. Standard process. Nothing invasive. Daniel noted that the man had not answered the question he'd asked. He noted this, the way he noted everything quietly filed away used later. What certain interests? Daniel said. I'm not at liberty to be specific on an initial call. but I can tell you that my client is interested in ensuring that any misunderstandings related to recent events are resolved privately and professionally in a way that benefits everyone involved. Lily walked into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair sideways, dragging her backpack by one strap. She pointed at the unfinished sandwich with a questioning expression. Daniel held up one finger 1 minute, and she went to sit at the table and started reorganizing the items in her backpack with the serious attention of someone preparing for an expedition. "I don't have any misunderstandings," Daniel said into the phone. "Of course not," Garrett said. "I didn't mean to imply you did. My client simply wants to make sure that recent events, specifically any items that may have changed hands, are handled with appropriate discretion. We believe that's in everyone's best interest, including yours." Items that may have changed hands. The envelope. They knew about the envelope, or they suspected it. "I'm going to need you to be more specific," Daniel said. "I understand. In person would be better for specificity. My client is prepared to discuss a significant good faith gesture, a financial arrangement compensation for any inconvenience structured in a way that would provide real security for you and your family. We're talking about a number that would change your daughter's future significantly." Lily was now pulling books out of her backpack one by one, examining each one with the gravity of a museum curator. "You're offering me money," Daniel said. "To do what specifically?" "To allow this situation to resolve itself quietly. To let the appropriate parties handle a family matter without outside interference." "And if I decline the meeting?" The slightest pause. Not the worried pause of someone caught off guard, the calculating pause of someone deciding how much to reveal. "My client simply hopes it won't come to that. These situations can become complicated for everyone involved when they move outside a private resolution. There are questions that can arise about how certain documents were obtained, certain items transported, certain information accessed. My client would prefer to avoid those questions on everyone's behalf." There it was. The turn from offer to threat managed so smoothly that someone less experienced would have missed the hinge between them. "I appreciate the call, Mr. Garrett," Daniel said. "I'll be in touch." He hung up. He finished Lily's sandwich, cut it diagonal, put it in the bag with the apple and the juice box, and set it by the door. Then he sat down across from her at the table while she completed her backpack inventory. "Dad," she said without looking up, "do you think Mrs. Patterson gives extra credit?" "I think Mrs. Patterson gives extra credit to people who do the original credit first," Daniel said. "That seems like a policy designed to discourage ambition." He looked at his 8-year-old daughter for a moment, at the absolute seriousness of her face, the dark eyes that were so precisely Claire's that sometimes he had to breathe through looking at them, and felt the familiar mix of grief and gratitude that had become the background frequency of his life. He thought about the phone call. He thought about a man named Garrett and the client behind him who was willing to offer money and imply legal threats before 7 in the morning. "Lilybug," he said. You know how we talk about people who try to solve problems by making them disappear instead of actually fixing them?" She looked up. "Like when Kevin took Tommy's calculator and then said there was no calculator instead of saying sorry. Exactly like that." "Those people are cowards," she said with the serene confidence of someone who had made peace with this conclusion long ago. "Yeah," Daniel said. "They are." He texted Victoria before he even got Lily to the bus stop. Someone called. Attorney named Paul Garrett, offering money for quiet, implying problems if I don't take the meeting. They have my number from contractor records. It starts. Her response came in 4 minutes. "Don't take any meetings without me knowing. Forward me Garrett's number. This is good. It means he's moving." Then after 30 seconds, "Are you okay?" I thought about how to answer that. He typed, "Ask me again after the board meeting." Then he put the phone in his pocket and watched Lily get on the bus and waved when she turned around in the window to check that he was still there, which she always did every single morning without fail, and which he thought was probably the most important thing he did all day. Victoria had the Garrett call logged by 9 a.m. with her outside attorney, a woman named Patricia Solis, who had made a career out of corporate accountability cases, and who had been one of the first calls Victoria made on the second morning after finding the photograph. Patricia had listened to everything with the focused stillness of a surgeon reviewing imaging, and then said simply, "If you're right, this is serious. If you're wrong, you're going to burn a bridge you can't rebuild. So let's make sure you're right." When Victoria told her about Garrett, Patricia was quiet for a moment. "He moved faster than I expected," she said. "Richard always moves fast when he's scared," Victoria said. "I've watched him do it in business for 20 years. He makes preemptive moves. He doesn't wait to see if a threat is real. He acts on the possibility of the threat and then manages the response." "Which tells us something important," Patricia said. "He knows the documents exist. He knows something exists. Whether he knows the full contents, the recording, the trust amendment, the letter is a different question. He may be acting on suspicion rather than certainty." "Either way, he's making moves," Victoria said. "Which means the timeline just compressed. How far out is your board meeting?" 5 days. Patricia exhaled through her nose. "Tell me what you have," Victoria told her. She went through everything in the order she'd uncovered it. The Aldgate payments, the shell entities, the trust amendment language, the attorney who'd been hired into Richard's controlled firm after completing the estate work, the recording of Margaret the letter, the notarized trust document naming Lily. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Victoria trusted about her. When Victoria finished, Patricia said, "The chain isn't complete. You can show financial irregularities. You can show a trust amendment drafted to solve a specific problem. You can show the attorney was subsequently employed by Richard's entity. But you cannot yet directly connect those financial payments to the suppression of the Albany documents. That gap is what he's going to attack if you take this to the board." "I know," Victoria said. "That's why I need Harriet Bloom." Silence for a beat. "You think she's findable?" "I think a woman who had a successful private practice doesn't just evaporate. I think she went somewhere that felt safe, and I think if the right person approached her the right way, she might be ready to stop being quiet." Victoria paused. "Ellen is still working the financial thread. I need someone working the human thread. I need Harriet Bloom." "That's investigative work," Patricia said. "That's not my lane." "I know whose lane it is," Victoria said. She drove herself to Daniel's building that evening, which was not something she had planned when she woke up that morning. She had planned to call. But she had been in meetings and on calls all day, managing the ordinary business of running a company while carrying an extraordinary secret. And by 5 o'clock she understood that what she needed to say required a face rather than a voice. He opened the door in jeans and a gray t-shirt, which was the first time she'd seen him outside of his work uniform. And there was something briefly disorienting about it, like seeing a place you'd only ever seen in winter, suddenly without snow. He looked less armored somehow, more like a person and less like a role. "This is different from calling," he said without particular surprise. "I need to ask you something in person," she said. He stepped back and let her in. The apartment was small and clean and organized in the precise way of someone who didn't have room for disorder. Everything in its place. Nothing wasted the specific economy of a person who had made peace with what they had. There were drawings on the refrigerator held up by magnets, a pair of small sneakers by the door, a stack of library books on the coffee table with a handwritten bookmark sticking out of the top one. "Lily's asleep," he said quietly. "She was up late last night finishing a diorama of the water cycle." "Did she get the extra credit?" "Mrs. Patterson has not yet issued a ruling." Victoria almost smiled. She sat down on the couch when he gestured to it, and he sat across from her in the chair that faced the door. An old habit from his Navy years, she guessed the instinct to always face the entrance. "They found your number in 6 hours," she said. "I know. That means they're moving on multiple fronts." Garrett was the soft move, the offer, the suggestion. Hard moves follow soft ones when the soft ones don't work. She paused. "I need to know how much pressure you can take." He looked at her steadily. "What kind of pressure are we talking about?" Garrett implied legal questions about how the documents were obtained. "That's a threat to manufacture a legal problem for you, not necessarily one that would succeed in court, but one designed to cost you time and money and stress to defend. Beyond that, Richard has media contacts. He's used them before when he needed to shape a narrative." If he decides to go public with a version of this, before I can get in front of the board, he'll paint you as a disgruntled contractor trying to exploit a grieving family. He called me a desperate man trying to destroy a legacy, Daniel said. Victoria looked at him. He hasn't yet, Daniel said. But that's what he'll say. I've been thinking about how he'll frame it. What's the most damaging story he can tell about me? He said it without bitterness. Just analysis. Former Navy guy, civilian maintenance worker working in the building finds out who the CEO is, does some research, discovers a family angle he can use, shows up with a wallet, a story, some documents his dead wife supposedly kept. It writes itself. Yes, Victoria said. It does. And the fact that it is not true doesn't matter if he says it first and loud enough. Which is why I need to get in front of the board before he does. But to do that, I need the gap closed. She leaned forward. I need Harriet Bloom. I think you can find her. He was quiet. Your Navy background, she said. Intelligence systems, records. You know how to trace people who don't want to be traced. Not illegally, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. But there are legitimate methods. Public records, professional licensing, bar registration updates, address changes filed with courts. Things that require patience and skill, and the kind of methodical thinking that, I can find her, he said. I've actually already started. She stopped. You started looking. The day after we met, he said. Not because I was running ahead of you, because I needed to know the same thing you do. If the documents she held are gone, then the only path to the gap is through her testimony. And her testimony only matters if she's willing to give it. So I needed to know if she was findable, and if she was findable, whether she seemed like someone who might be reachable. And he reached for his phone, pulled up something, and handed it to her. Harriet Bloom, currently registered with the New York Bar as inactive. Last known address, Albany, 18 months ago. That's the closed practice address. But she filed a change of agent notification with a small nonprofit board. She sits on pro bono work. She did for a housing advocacy group 3 months ago. The notification lists a contact address in Vermont, small town outside Burlington. Victoria looked at the screen. You found her in 4 days, she said. I found an address in 4 days, he said. Finding her and getting her to talk are two different things. Will she talk? I don't know, he said honestly. Someone scared her enough to close her practice. That kind of scare doesn't go away because you moved to Vermont. But, he paused. She kept the non-profit connection. She filed an update. She didn't go completely dark. That tells me something. That she's not entirely at peace with disappearing. That she kept one thread, he said. People who want to truly disappear cut every thread. She left one. That's either an oversight or it's intentional. And she doesn't strike me as someone who makes oversights. Victoria looked at the address on the phone for a moment longer, then handed it back. I'll go, she said. Alone. Patricia will come with me. Attorney to attorney, it's the right approach. Less threatening than showing up with a CEO. When? Tomorrow. If I wait any longer, Richard's next move closes the window. She looked at him. What are you going to do about Garrett? I'm going to call him back and tell him I'll meet, Daniel said. Victoria's head came up sharply. No, I'm not going to take his offer. I'm going to document the meeting. Patricia said you can record with one-party consent in this state. I'm one party I can record. I let him make his offer formally on record with specifics. Whatever he says becomes evidence of the pressure campaign. She paused, recalibrated. That's exactly right. I know, he said simply. It was not arrogance. It was just a man who understood strategy and had done it professionally in higher stakes situations than this one. You're good at this, she said. I had a good teacher, he said. The Navy drills you on how to stay calm when someone is trying to destabilize you. The goal is always to gather information rather than respond to pressure. Let the other side show you their hand. They always show it eventually if you give them enough quiet to fill. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the first time she'd seen him, the worn uniform, the old toolbox, the quiet steadiness that she had clocked as ordinary and unremarkable because she hadn't been looking properly. I owe you an apology, she said. From the first morning. He looked at her with a slight expression of uncertainty. For slamming me against a wall. For what was in my head before I slammed you against the wall, she said. When I saw you on the executive floor, I clocked what you were wearing before I clocked anything else. I'd already decided what you were before you'd said a word to me. You'd also just found a photograph that rearranged your entire understanding of your family, he said. I'll allow for some contextual grace. That's generous. It's not generous, he said. It's accurate. You were in shock, and you reacted. I've been in situations where people in shock make much worse decisions than grabbing someone's collar. He paused. But I appreciate you saying it. Victoria nodded once. Claire would have liked you, he said. He said it quietly, almost as a thought rather than a statement. She was very good at reading people. She would have seen through the CEO armor in about 4 minutes. She would have found the actual person underneath it and decided whether that person was worth the trouble. He paused. She would have decided yes. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I hope I'm worth the trouble, she said, and she meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the board meeting or the documents or the case she was building. She meant it in the way a person means it when they're asking a question about themselves that they don't yet know the answer to. Keep doing what you're doing, Daniel said, and you will be. Vermont in late October had the particular beauty of a place that wasn't trying. The trees were mostly bare, the sky low and gray, the roads quiet in the way that felt like peace rather than emptiness. Victoria and Patricia Solis found the address at 10:45 in the morning, a white house on a road outside Burlington, modest, well-kept, with a garden that had been put to bed for winter, the beds mulched and tidy. Patricia had advised on the approach on the drive up. Let me lead, she'd said. Attorney to attorney, professional courtesy, no surprises. We're not accusing her of anything. We're offering her a way out of something she's been carrying. What if she says no? Then we leave, Patricia said. We don't pressure her. This only works if she comes willingly. The woman who answered the door was in her mid-50s, dark-haired, gone partly gray, with glasses pushed up on her head, and the alert eyes of someone who had spent decades reading between the lines of what people said and meant. She looked at them for exactly 2 seconds before she said quietly, I wondered when someone would come. Ms. Bloom, Patricia said. I'm Patricia Solis. I'm an attorney representing interests connected to the Hale estate. This is Victoria Hale. Harriet Bloom looked at Victoria for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not quite guilt, not quite relief. Something that had been waiting a long time to resolve into one or the other. You look like your mother, she said. I've been told that, Victoria said. Harriet Bloom opened the door wider and stepped back. You'd better come in. She made tea without asking if they wanted it, which Patricia said later was the tell. A woman who makes tea without asking has already decided to let you stay. She sat across from them at her kitchen table, with her hands around her mug, and told them what had happened in the careful, precise way of a woman who had been organizing this account in her mind for 18 months, hoping someone would come to hear it. Margaret Hale had approached her 3 years before she died. She had found Harriet through a referral from a women's foundation. They'd both supported a connection that had no relation to Hale Consolidated and no connection to Richard. She had explained what she needed: a private trust amendment, legally airtight, prepared outside any firm with any existing relationship to her family. She had explained why. She told me about Claire, Harriet said. She told me everything. She wasn't ashamed. I want to make sure you understand that. She was one of the most clear-eyed people I've ever worked with professionally. She knew exactly what she'd done 30 years earlier, and she'd made her peace with it in the only way she could. She'd spent years looking for Claire. When she found her, she wanted to make sure that finding her meant something legally, materially, permanently. The trust amendment, Victoria said. I drafted it over 2 months. She reviewed every word 3 times. The notarization was done privately with a notary I have used for 15 years, who is completely independent. The document was real, it was legal, and it would have created a legitimate basis for challenging the estate distribution if anything happened to either of them before it could be executed formally. What happened to it? Victoria asked, though she already knew the shape of the answer. Harriet looked at her mug. 3 weeks after Margaret died, I received a visit. Not a call, a visit. 2 men, one of whom identified himself as representing the Hale family's estate interests. They were professional, polite even. They explained that the estate had been settled, that all legal matters were resolved, and that any outstanding client work I held related to the Hale estate should be considered superseded by the settlement. She paused. And then they explained the other part. What was the other part? Patricia asked. They had information about a case from early in my career, Harriet said. A case I'd handled that had a procedural irregularity. Nothing criminal. Nothing that had harmed a client, but the kind of thing that the bar could theoretically review if it were brought to their attention. It was 22 years old. I had not thought about it in 15 years. She looked up. They didn't threaten. They were very careful not to threaten. They simply mentioned it. In the context of making sure I understood that private client matters sometimes required extreme discretion, and that my own professional interests might be best served by a period of reflection. They gave you a reason to disappear, Victoria said. They gave me a reason to calculate, Harriet said. I'm not proud of the calculation I made. I had clients who depended on my practice. I was a year and a half from retirement. And I told myself that the documents were already filed with me, that they existed, and that Margaret was gone, and that perhaps Claire would find another way. She stopped, looked at her mug again. And then Claire died too. And the other way closed. Why did you keep the non-profit connection? Victoria asked. You disappeared professionally, but you filed an address update with that board. Harriet looked at her. Because I kept thinking that if someone was looking, if someone who should know about this was looking, I didn't want to be completely unfindable. She paused. Your mother was a good person, Ms. Hale. She trusted me with something that mattered more to her than most of what her money could buy. I didn't honor that trust the way I should have. I didn't want to be unfindable to the people she loved. The kitchen was quiet. The documents, Patricia said carefully. The originals, are they? I didn't give them the originals, Harriet said. She said it with a calm that suggested she had made this decision deliberately at a cost she'd been prepared to pay. I told them I had returned all client documents to the estate upon the client's death, which was technically what I was required to tell them. She looked at Victoria. But I don't believe in giving documents to people whose interest in them is making them disappear. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Where are they? She said, and her voice was very steady and very quiet. Harriet set down her mug and stood up and went to the hallway and opened a closet and reached to the back of the top shelf and came back with a plain brown envelope sealed with Margaret Hale, written on the outside in a firm, even hand. She set it on the table. She gave me specific instructions, Harriet said. She said if anything happens to me and if someone comes looking with the right name and the right questions, give it to them. Don't give it to anyone who comes with money. Don't give it to anyone who comes with fear. Wait for someone who comes with the truth. She looked at Victoria. You came with the truth. And you came with Claire's husband's information about the documents, which is something only the right people would have. She paused. I've been waiting for you. Victoria put her hand on the envelope. She did not open it yet. The men who came to see you, she said. Did you get a name, either of them? The one who spoke said his name was Garrett, Harriet said. Paul Garrett. Victoria and Patricia looked at each other. He's still working for Richard, Patricia said. And now he's also calling Daniel, Victoria said. Same man, both ends of this. She turned back to Harriet. Would you be willing to testify, not in court, not yet, possibly not ever, if this resolves through the board? But a formal recorded statement with Patricia present documenting what you've just told us and when it happened. Harriet was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a branch moved against the window in the wind. The tea had gone cold. Yes, she said. I've been ready to say yes to that question for 18 months. I was just waiting for someone to ask it. They drove back with the brown envelope on the seat between them, like something that needed to be watched. Patricia recorded Harriet's full statement before they left. 62 minutes of detailed, clear, chronologically organized testimony from a woman who had spent 18 months being afraid and who was finished with it. She described every meeting with Margaret, every document she'd prepared, the visit from Garrett, the implied threat, the decision she'd made, and the decision she was making now. When it was done, Harriet had walked them to the door and shaken both their hands. At the last moment, she'd looked at Victoria and said, "Your mother told me that she'd missed 30 years with her daughter. She said she wasn't going to spend whatever time she had left making the same mistake in a different direction. She meant—" She paused, collecting the words. She meant that she wasn't going to let fear make the decision anymore. She'd spent 30 years letting fear make the decision, and all it had done was cost her 30 years. Victoria had nodded. "I'm trying to follow her example," she said. On the drive back, Patricia opened the brown envelope carefully and spread the contents across her briefcase on her lap. She went through them with methodical speed, and with every page, she turned her expression got quieter and more certain. "It's all here," she said finally. Original trust amendment with the proper notary seal and a second independent witness. A 6-page letter from Margaret in her own handwriting explaining the background and her intentions. The names of witnesses to the signing. A certified copy of Claire's DNA match result. She looked up. And a letter from Margaret directly to Richard. Victoria looked at the road ahead. "What does it say?" Patricia read for a moment. Then she read aloud in a voice that stayed professional with some effort. "Richard, if you are reading this, then someone found the courage that I ran out of while I was alive. I know what you will do when you discover that Claire exists. I've known you for 25 years, and I know how you protect what you think belongs to you. I want you to know that I understand why you will do it, and I want you to know that it will not be enough. The truth about my family is not yours to manage. It never was. Margaret." Victoria drove in silence for a moment. "She knew he'd find out," Victoria said. "She knew. She prepared for it anyway. She just needed the right person to carry it far enough forward that it couldn't be buried again." Patricia folded the letter carefully. She found 2 of them. "Daniel," Victoria said. "And you," Patricia said. Victoria kept her eyes on the road. The trees on both sides were bare and gray against the sky, and the road ahead was long and straight and clear. She thought about her mother at 17. She thought about her mother at 60, sitting across from a daughter she'd never stopped looking for, laughing in a garden with climbing roses on a brick wall, while someone she'd never expected pressed a shutter on a camera. She thought about a sealed envelope sitting on a closet shelf in Vermont for 18 months, waiting for someone who would come with the truth instead of money or fear. She thought about 4 days from now, and a boardroom full of people who were about to find out what the company they governed had been protecting and at what cost and on whose behalf. She thought about Richard Hale, who had spent 20 years believing that power meant permanence, who had shaped narratives and managed records and paid $430,000 to make a woman's existence disappear, who had believed, as powerful men usually believed, that the things he buried stayed buried. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about that from the moment a toolbox latch broke on the 42nd floor and a wallet fell to the floor and a CEO bent down to pick it up. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. She glanced at it quickly, the way you glance at things when you're driving and they feel important enough to register. It was from Daniel Garrett, meeting done. Recorded. He offered $250,000 and implied a civil suit over document handling if I declined. Patricia's going to want to hear it. "I'm okay. How did Vermont go?" Oh, she would call him when she stopped. She would tell him that Vermont went exactly the way his wife had trusted that it would go eventually if the right person carried things long enough and far enough in the right direction. She would tell him that the envelope was safe and the testimony was recorded and the gap was closed. She would tell him that in 4 days, none of what Richard had done in the dark was going to survive the light. But first, for a few more miles, she just drove with her mother's letter in a brown envelope on the seat beside her and the road opening up ahead, and something that she had not felt since the morning she'd found the photograph finally beginning slowly to feel like solid ground beneath her feet. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday. Richard arrived at 8:40, which was earlier than he usually arrived for anything, and Victoria knew that because Marco had texted her the moment Richard stepped off the elevator. She was already in the boardroom, had been there since 7:30, sitting at the head of the table with a coffee she hadn't touched, and a folder in front of her that she had organized and reorganized 3 times, not because it needed reorganizing, but because her hands needed something to do. Patricia was in the building in a conference room on 36, available by phone in 30 seconds. Ellen had sent her final audit summary at 11 the night before, with a message that said, "It's complete. It's clean. It's enough." Daniel was at work a job in Brooklyn, a panel replacement in an office building, and he had texted her at 7 with good luck. Tell the truth. The rest follows. She had read that text 4 times. She heard Richard's voice in the corridor before he came through the door. Warm, familiar, the easy confidence of a man who had walked into this room for 20 years and never once felt unwelcome in it. He greeted 2 board members by first name. He laughed at something someone said. He came through the door with the particular energy of a man who believed he was walking into a meeting he had already won. He saw Victoria at the head of the table, and his face arranged itself into the affectionate smile he always gave her in professional settings. The smile that said, "I'm proud of you, and I'm on your side, and we're family all at once." The smile she had spent 34 years accepting as genuine. "You're here early," he said. "I wanted to be ready," she said. Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker quick and controlled. He sat in his usual chair 2 seats to her left and set his portfolio on the table, and Victoria watched him settle into the performance of a man who was comfortable, which was itself a performance she now recognized for what it was. The other board members filed in over the next 15 minutes. 7 people, not counting Victoria and Richard, 6 of them. Career executives and independent directors. One of them, a woman named Carol Huang, who had been on the Hale board since before Victoria's father died, and who had once told Victoria at a dinner that had nothing to do with business, that the most important thing about running a company was knowing the difference between the people who protected the institution and the people who were protecting themselves inside it. Victoria had thought about Carol Huang a lot in the past 5 days. At 9 o'clock exactly, she opened the meeting. She did not begin with the agenda that Marco had circulated. She set a single document in front of each board member, printed clean, no-cover page, and she let them read the first page before she spoke. The first page was a 1-paragraph summary of what she was about to present, written in the plainest language she could manage, because she had learned from her father that the truth was most powerful when it didn't need decoration. The room got very quiet very quickly. Richard looked at this page. She watched him read it. She watched the stillness come over his face, not the stillness of shock, but the stillness of a man recalibrating under fire. And she knew in that moment that whatever he said next would be the first move of his defense, not a genuine response, so she didn't wait for it. "I'm going to walk you through what I've found," she said, "and then I'm going to give each of you time to review the supporting documentation. I want to ask that everyone hold questions until I've presented the full picture. What I'm presenting today is serious, and it deserves a complete hearing before any individual part of it is addressed in isolation. Can we agree to that?" 5 of the 7 board members nodded. 1 looked at Richard. 1, Carol Huang, looked only at Victoria with an expression that was unreadable and absolutely focused. Richard set the page down. "Victoria," he said, and his voice was very careful, very warm. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately before—" "I've had 4 days of private," Victoria said. "What I have to say belongs in this room." He went quiet. And in his quiet, she heard the thing she had been listening for. Not the wounded silence of a man who had been wrongly accused, but the calculating silence of a man deciding which move cost him least. She opened the folder. She told them everything. She told them about the photograph in the wallet, about Claire, about her mother's 30 years of searching and 2 years of finding. She told them about the trust amendment, the letter, the recording, and she played 7 minutes of the recording through the speaker on her laptop. Her mother's voice filling the boardroom in a way that made 2 board members look down at the table and made Richard go very still in a way that had nothing calculated in it anymore. Victoria let the silence sit for a moment. Then she walked through the financial evidence, the Aldgate payments, the shell entities, the trust amendment language, the attorney hired into Richard's controlled firm. She presented Ellen's audit summary, which was 31 pages of documented financial analysis that Ellen had color-coded with the patient thoroughness of someone who understood that evidence needed to be navigable, not just comprehensive. Then she presented Patricia's summary of Harriet Bloom's testimony and the brown envelope's contents, and the recording of Garrett's meeting with Daniel, in which Garrett offered $250,000 for silence, and implied a civil suit if the offer was declined. She did all of this in 41 minutes, without her voice breaking once, and without looking at Richard more than was necessary to make the point that she wasn't avoiding him. When she finished, she said, "I'll take questions now." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Carol Huang said, "How long have you known?" "5 days," Victoria said. "And you're certain of the documentation?" "I have an outside attorney, an independent auditor, and a notarized sworn statement from the attorney who prepared my mother's original documents. I am certain." Carol Huang nodded once slowly and looked at Richard. Everyone looked at Richard. He had his hands flat on the table, very still, and for the first time in the 20 years Victoria had watched him operate, he looked like a man who understood that the room had shifted and that he had not shifted with it. He looked like a man who had spent 2 decades moving faster than the truth and had finally run out of runway. "Richard," Carol Huang said, and her voice was perfectly level. "Would you like to respond to what we've heard?" I was quiet for a long moment. And then he looked at Victoria, and she saw something in his face that she had not expected, and that she would think about for a long time afterward. Not anger, not calculation, but something exhausted. Something that had been held up for a very long time by the effort of holding it. "Your mother and I disagreed about what was best for the company," he said. "She wanted to restructure things in ways that I believed would create instability. I made decisions to protect what your father built." "You paid over $600,000 to shell companies to suppress a legal document," Victoria said. "That's not protecting what my father built. That's protecting what you wanted." "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," she said. And she said it without anger, just clean and clear and final, the way you close a door that has been open too long. Carol Huang put her hand flat on the table in a gesture that was not dramatic, but was completely decisive. "I'd like to call for a motion," she said. Richard Hale resigned from all advisory and board roles affiliated with Hale Consolidated by 2 o'clock that afternoon, in a letter drafted by the company's legal team that was precise and bloodless and said nothing that wasn't necessary. There would be further legal proceedings. Patricia had already been in contact with the appropriate authorities about the Garrett payments and the Aldgate entities, but that was a process that would take months and unfold in the proper channels, and Victoria had made her peace with slow justice being more durable than fast revenge. She sat in her office afterward alone for about 20 minutes. She didn't do anything. She didn't make calls or read documents or answer the 11 messages that had come in during the meeting. She just sat there in the quiet and let the past 5 days settle around her, like something that had been moving very fast and had finally come to rest. Then she called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, and she could hear ambient sound in the background, tools of building's interior noise, the ordinary sounds of work. "It's done," she said. He was quiet for a beat. "How did he take it?" "He looked tired," she said. "I think he's been holding it up for a long time." "People who carry lies usually do," Daniel said. The board voted to formally acknowledge the documentation. The estate attorneys are going to review the trust amendment with outside counsel. It's going to take time, months probably, before the legal piece resolves. But the record is corrected. The board knows. The company knows. She paused. "Claire's name is in the board minutes now, officially, as my mother's daughter." She heard him exhale. It was a quiet sound, not dramatic, but she heard everything in it: 4 years of carrying something, and the specific feeling of being able to set it down. "Thank you," he said. "You did this," she said. "You carried it here." "Claire carried it," he said. "I just didn't put it down." She met Lily 3 weeks later on a Saturday in a park that was the kind of neutral ground that adults constructed when the occasion was important enough to be careful about. Daniel had asked Lily only what was necessary, that there was someone who had known her grandmother Margaret who would like to meet her if Lily was comfortable with that. Lily had asked 2 questions. Was the person nice, and would there be somewhere to get hot chocolate nearby? Both questions had been answered satisfactorily. They were on a bench, the 3 of them, with hot chocolates from the cart 20 yards away, when Lily looked at Victoria with the direct, unfiltered assessment of an 8-year-old and said, Dad says you run a whole building. I run the company that's in the building, Victoria said. Is it hard? Sometimes. Dad says the hard things are usually the ones worth doing, Lily said with the tone of someone who had heard this enough times to have adopted it as personal philosophy. Your dad is right about that, Victoria said. Lily considered this, then took a long drink of hot chocolate. Did you know my Grandma Margaret? Victoria looked at her at the dark eyes. The hale cheekbones that she now understood had traveled a longer route than she'd known to get to this small face on this park bench, and felt something that she didn't have a precise word for. It was grief and gratitude, and the specific ache of a thing that should have existed longer than it did. Not the way I should have, Victoria said honestly. But I'm learning who she was. And the more I learn, the more I think you would have loved her. Lily thought about this with the seriousness she applied to most things. Do you think she would have liked me? I think, Victoria said carefully, that she spent a very long time hoping you existed, and I think finding out that you did would have been the best news she ever got. Lily nodded slowly, processing this. Then she looked at the hot chocolate in her hands and said in the matter-of-fact tone of someone completing a logical sequence, "Then I'm glad she found out." Victoria had to look away for a moment. She looked at the bare trees across the park and breathed through her nose, and then looked back. Me too, she said. In the months that followed, the legal process moved. The way legal processes moved, not fast, not gracefully, but forward. The estate review confirmed that the trust amendment Harriet Bloom had prepared was valid and predated Richard's restructuring by 9 months, which meant the restructuring had been executed in direct conflict with a pre-existing legal document. Patricia's team filed the appropriate actions. Garrett cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure, and through Garrett's cooperation, the paper trail to the Aldgate payments was completed with the specificity that had been missing. Richard did not fight everything. Whether that was the exhaustion Victoria had seen on his face in the boardroom, or a calculation that full resistance would cost him more than partial concession. She didn't know, and had decided she didn't need to know. Some things you understood completely, and some things you let be what they were. The estate revision took 7 months to finalize. When it did, it formally recognized Lily Ann Whitaker as Margaret Hale's biological granddaughter and established a trust in her name. Not the entire estate, not a dramatic reversal of everything, but a meaningful and permanent acknowledgement that carried both financial weight and legal record. Lily's name was now in documents that would outlast everyone in this story, which was exactly what Margaret had intended. Daniel accepted the trust without elaboration. He told Victoria when she called to tell him it was finalized, "Lily's going to college, and she'll know her grandmother paid for it." "That's all you want," Victoria said. "That's everything I want," he said. She didn't argue with him, because she had learned by then that Daniel Whitaker was a man who meant what he said and didn't add words to fill space, and that the things he wanted were exactly the things he said they were, which was rarer than it should have been. Victoria did create one more thing separate from the legal process, because it was not a legal thing, it was a family thing, and she had come to understand the difference. In a conference room on the 42nd floor of Hale Tower, the floor where all of this had begun with a wallet on a corridor floor, and 9 words on the back of a photograph, she had a framed display installed on the wall across from the elevator. It was not large, it was not dramatic. It held 2 photographs side by side, printed cleanly and matted in simple frames. The first was the garden photograph. Her mother and Claire laughing, caught in the moment before they'd been ready for the camera. The second was the park bench photograph, her mother and Lily eyes closed, and arms wrapped around a little girl who was laughing at something only the 2 of them knew. Beneath both photographs on a simple plaque were the words her mother had written on the back of that first picture, "My first daughter deserved to be remembered." And beneath that, in Victoria's own edition, "She is." Marco had watched her hang it, and then stood there looking at it for a moment before he said quietly, "I didn't know about any of this." "I know," she said. "Are you okay?" She looked at the photographs. At her mother's face in both of them, young and surprised in one, older and completely at peace in the other. At Claire laughing in a garden in the last good years of a life that had been too short. At Lily's small body curled into her grandmother's arms, both of them unaware of the camera, both of them exactly where they belonged. "I'm getting there," she said. The last time she saw Daniel that year, it was December, and she ran into him in the lobby of Hale Tower, the way you run into people in the buildings where your lives intersect. Not planned. Just the city, doing what the city did, placing people in the same corridor at the same moment, and leaving them to figure out what to do with that. How was there for a different job, a different floor, a different system that needed someone's patient hands on it. He had his toolbox. He had the work order folder. He looked exactly the way he had looked the first morning. The worn uniform, the calm posture, the eyes that noticed more than they advertised. The difference was that now she knew what those eyes had carried, and for how long, and at what cost. "How's Lily?" she said. "She got the extra credit," he said. Mrs. Patterson ultimately ruled in her favor. "I'm glad justice prevailed." "She's going through a phase of correcting adults when they're factually wrong," he said. "It is simultaneously very clear and very exhausting." Victoria smiled, a real one, the kind that happened before she could manage it, the kind her mother had in both photographs. "She sounds like someone worth knowing." "She is," he said simply. "She really is." They stood for a moment in the lobby, the two of them, with the city moving around them through the glass and the building humming above them, and the particular quality of quiet that exists between people who have been through something together and are now on the other side of it. "Thank you," Victoria said, "for not putting that wallet back in your pocket when you found it was gone. For staying when I told you to." "You said don't leave the building," he said. "I did what I was asked. You did more than that." He considered this with the slight expression of a man who was uncomfortable with gratitude, but had learned to receive it without deflecting it completely. "Your mother did the hard part," he said. "She spent 30 years looking for Claire, and 2 years telling the truth about her, and then trusted a broken toolbox latch to finish what she started." He looked at the elevator, then back at Victoria. "I was just the guy carrying the wallet. You were the right guy carrying it," she said. He picked up his toolbox. He had a job to do, and she had a company to run, and the morning was moving forward, the way mornings did, indifferent to the significance of the moment inside it. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she said. "And tell Lily I said diagonal is objectively correct." He almost smiled, that near miss of a smile she'd come to recognize as his version of a full one. Then he walked to the freight elevator, and the doors opened, and he stepped in, and the doors closed, and he was gone. Victoria stood in the lobby for a moment longer than she needed to. She thought about this morning 5 months ago, when she had walked across this same lobby in the other direction and stepped out of a car, with her mind full of the Hargrove contract, and her day already organized, and her world complete and entirely legible to her. She thought about how much she had not known. She thought about how certainty could be the most dangerous thing a person carried, more dangerous than doubt, more dangerous than fear, because certainty closed your eyes to the things that were right in front of you. She had looked at a man in a worn uniform and seen a maintenance worker. She had looked at her family and seen a story she'd been given. She had looked at her mother's last words and heard the medication. She had been wrong about all of it. She was not wrong anymore. She took the elevator up to the 42nd floor, walked past the framed photographs on the wall, her mother young and laughing, her mother old and at peace, and the small dark-haired girl, connecting both pictures like a living bridge between what had been lost and what had been found. And she went to her office and sat down and opened her laptop and got to work. Not because the work was more important than the people, but because she had learned finally and completely that the two were not separate things. That a company built on a lie was not a legacy worth protecting. That power which required erasure was not power at all. And that the most important thing her mother had ever done was not building a fortune, or running a foundation, or leaving behind a name that appeared on the side of a building. The most important thing her mother had ever done was spend 30 years looking for a daughter she'd had to let go, and 2 years loving her when she found her, and enough time left over to trust the right people to finish what she'd started. The old wallet sat on Daniel Whitaker's kitchen counter that morning, next to Lily's completed extra credit project, and a half-empty coffee cup, and a note in a child's handwriting that said, "Dad, Mrs. Patterson said I can present to the whole class." This is very good news. It had been there since the day this all began, unremarkable, worn at the corners, carrying nothing. Now except what it had always carried: a photograph of a man and his daughter, and the memory of a woman who had loved both of them enough to make sure they were never forgotten. It was not valuable. It was not meant to be. It was just the thing that had carried the truth long enough and far enough for the truth to finally arrive where it had always been headed. And that in the end was everything.